Oh, okay.
We're going to do this now.
Wait, we didn't figure out the positioning here. Here?
Do you actually want to wait for some water?
Nah. I mean, we'll just awkwardly have water come into shot. Like, I know.
Thank you.
Hooray. Oh, I'm totally.
A bit away.
There we go.
That's fine. You're kind of in the. That's fine.
Worst. This is the weirdest positioning ever. Can everyone see the screen? Good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're here to talk about tax relief. How
Yeah.
are you?
I didn't think you'd realize it'd be this fun. Okay. We are actually here to talk about tax relief now. So, I'm Julia Brown. I work at the British Film Institute. We administer the video games tax relief as well as a bunch of the other creative industries tax reliefs, not all of them. Alexander.
Hi, I'm Alexander Sliwinski. I handle operations for Bithell Games, which is just Mike Bithell's totally casual way of naming a game studio.
So in terms of why both I and Alexander are here, at the BFI, obviously, we interact with a lot of studios, we interact with a lot of developers, but we kind of only see it from our side of going, this is the application form, we assess that, here's a certificate at the end. So in terms of like actually explaining how it works, we find it's a bit more interesting to actually talk to somebody from a studio because you kind of know how it works from the other side. And also it's nice to hear about how the game's tax relief actually impacts people beyond us going the certificate and going, here.
Here's your certificate. Now give it to your accountant.
Also, I should warn you, there's some people from HMRC in the room.
Huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
So you don't have to be really nice about them, though. But see if you can figure out which people are from HMRC. Okay. Okay.
Did you lose your notes?
I didn't. This is going really well.
Are we getting heckled? Is there heckling now? Is that how this is going to work? Oh. We love the HMRC.
Yeah.
They're lovely people. Actually, they are genuinely lovely people. They help out a lot.
So,
Sorry.
Alexander.
Yes.
How did you end up at Bithell Games?
It's a long road, getting from here to there. Yeah, I was a journalist for many years. I worked for a site called Joystick, covered business in the games industry. Basically, the fall of a lot of companies, THQ, 38 Studios, which actually does lead into why I'm kind of supportive of tax relief. What ended up happening is that journalism is a tough racket, and the site shut down. But at the time, I had gone back to school to get my MBA, and once the whole entire thing was over, I contacted Mike and was like, hey, so you want to do like a business thing and build a company? And he's sure like, yeah, let's do that. And so I've been working with Mike ever since.
And how many people work there now?
Two.
Two?
Yep.
You two?
Yep, us two. And then we have contractors that we compensate very well and come in and out. But yeah, because as we'll get to later, we don't really have necessarily the most consistent genre of games that we do. It ends up being that we use various coders and artists and animators rather than having just a group that we always go to.
And in terms of your actual role at the company, what would you call yourself?
I've changed. It used to be Chief Operations Officer. Now I've just made it Operations, but it's also finance. So I do the bookkeeping, but then I also have to do biz dev. I submit forms, make sure everyone gets paid. So yeah, that's pretty much, if it doesn't involve code, it involves me.
And all of this, I guess we can talk about this now in terms of you doing so many things. Part of your expertise has gone into a book. Has it not?
Oh, are we plugging?
Yeah,
are we
yeah,
plugging the
we're
book?
going to do that. Yeah.
Oh, we're plugging the book. Hi, Actually, no, it's almost going on a year now. We put out a book called The Game Dev Business Handbook. It's available at amazon.co.uk and amazon.com. You can also purchase it at gamedevbizbook.com, where I will send it to you personally from my house, because I'm the one who does the packing. Because as I stated, we are a large organization with massive infrastructure. No, I'm the one who sends it. And we're currently wrapping up, it's actually in my bag right now, the Game Dev Budgeting Handbook, which is our follow-up, and it basically takes the budgeting chapter of the first book and goes line item by line item of costs involved. And yeah, just for the music chapter alone, which is 25 pages, because music and acting and all the royalties and licensing involved in that is much more complicated than you think it should be.
So if you love this on-stage presentation, the book, you can absolutely love, aren't you? Both the books.
Yep, gamedevbizbook.com.
Yep.
Thank you.
So would you like to kind of introduce Bithell Games in terms of what your games are, what your output has been?
Oh, I mean, that's where that's where it gets complicated, because we've done. I mean, it starts with Thomas Was Alone, which is a puzzle platformer. Some of you may have played it at some point. And then the follow-up game to that was Volume, which is a stealth action game with a community-generated content aspect to it, where you can make levels. The next game was Earthshape, which was for Google's VR platform. Then the next game after that was actually Volume Coda at the same time. We did a VR version of Volume as well for PlayStation VR, which is a free add-on to the game. So if you have Volume and you pick up a PlayStation VR headset, you can play that as well. Then we followed it up with I'm so desperately trying not to say the next thing that we're working on right now, so I'm like going through this thing.
Don't say it.
No, no, I'm not going to do it. Then the next title we did was Subsurface Circular, which is a graphical twist on the text-based adventure, which is about a robot detective on a train investigating a bunch of disappearances. And then finally, Quarantine Circular, which is part of the Circular Anthology series and is about a bunch of scientists on a boat who capture an alien and are trying to find out why the alien is here and what they're up to.
And then nothing else, say no more.
And that's it. That's all we're doing. And of course, we're currently working on an unannounced title.
Mm-hmm. We are going to briefly talk about like what's actually involved in the cultural test, which is the first part of accessing the tax relief. You get a certificate at the end of it. But in terms of like why you'd actually want to go through filling in those forms, etc., I think it'd be good to like actually talk about what the impact of actually getting the tax relief is in terms of what it's actually worth. So to you guys, what has it actually been worth? I mean, it can be actual money if you want to say in those terms, or it can be just what has it allowed you to do? Like,
well. I mean, specifically, it allowed us to fund Subsurface Circular. That was a massive part of it, and yeah, because we're a small company and the money goes directly back into development. It allows us to, hire folks. It definitely is part of the creative process at this point. That it allows us to spend a little more on this animator, or spend a little more on this aspect of development. So yeah, it's allowing us to do more.
And we were talking a little bit before, and I asked you about, do you think the tax relief kind of working with Micah, I guess, is like you said, working across a bunch of different genres and stuff like that, talking about him being kind of wanting to take risks, etc. Yeah. You were saying that in the back of your mind, knowing that you have the tax relief there is kind of a nice thing.
No, it's a nice thing to have in your back pocket, and it allows you to, independent developers work on shoestrings, like do the best they can with what they have. So having any money coming back to us is fantastic and allows us to, do all these different things. And yeah, like I was saying earlier, the games we've done have been across numerous genres at this point. It'd be lovely to have some consistency and be able to be like, hey, so, puzzle platformer 1 did this, so 2 will do this. And the closest we've ever gotten to, doing something that's in the same genre is Quarantine. And even there, completely different cast, completely different like story. So yeah, not having consistency in terms of exactly what we're doing, that the tax relief and thinking about that stuff factors into the risks that we can take.
Kind of, has anyone here actually applied for tax relief before? No.
Ooh, fun times.
Yeah. So in terms of when you first heard about it, when and where was it exactly, the exact minute that you heard about it?
See, I love this question because the whole reason I heard about tax relief is I was a reporter at the time, so I was covering it because at the time I was living in Boston, Massachusetts, and Massachusetts was also planning on doing tax relief as well. And then there was an incident with a studio in Rhode Island called 38 Studios, and it was massive debacle. And so Massachusetts kind of got nervous and dropped the whole tax relief thing. And it hurt. Like it is, and in the time since, it's absolutely hurt the economy of Massachusetts to not be supporting game developers in the best way possible. And so, yeah, I remember when the tax relief for the UK came along, but of course, the big portion of it was essentially making fun of the whole like cultural aspect of it.
Red phone boxes, Winston Churchill.
Yeah.
We still get that.
So yeah, it was having fun with that whole entire aspect of things. So when I actually had to start filling out these forms, yeah, there's a little bit of nervous energy that goes into like, okay, so like what do we have to do to be like to get past the cultural test?
Yeah.
But it's fine. It's not. You don't have to put, like you said, red phone booths and.
Yeah. We still get people who think that there needs to be like a Union Jack in every single scene. I mean, it doesn't have to be every single scene. There has to be at least 3, just so we're clear. At least 3.
That's not true.
It's not true.
It's not true.
And I mean, in terms of like when you're applying to us, if you put something in the form that we don't agree with, we think you can get the points easier elsewhere, or we don't quite agree with your interpretation, we'll just let you know and say, actually, we think it deserves these points. Does that make sense to you? Or actually, we can't see where you've put it in the form, but we can't see that in your game design documents or the game. Can you just point out exactly what you're talking about? And it'll always be a dialogue kind of back and forth. It's not you put in a form and then we immediately say yes or no with a big stamp on it. We don't have any stamps.
And I actually do have to say the BFI is fantastic when it comes to filling out the form, because I think we'll get to this in a bit. The website is incredibly intimidating. Like it looks like a scary GeoCities, like Word doc horror machine. And it's incredibly intimidating, which is why we'll get to this in a bit.
We'll get to these.
Okay. But yeah, once you fill it out, the folks from the BFI will follow up with you and let you know if you've filled something out like incorrectly, or they think you could better utilize the points somewhere else. Because yeah, you are just trying to get to a certain number of points, submit that, and you're good to go from that point. But no, the BFI portion of it, of the entire process, is actually one of the things that you go into being most nervous about. But it ends up being the smoothest part of the entire process.
That's very nice to hear. And I think you've been in for a meeting with us. You've spoken to us on the phone. So we are kind of, if you want to come in for a meeting, we're absolutely happy to do that.
Well, the funny thing is I don't say the name of the game.
Yeah, don't.
No, I actually didn't have to do any meetings with the BFI until recently.
Yeah.
Before that, it was fairly straightforward. I would receive follow-up on some of the things, but no, it was a fairly straightforward process.
Good. Okay, so now we're actually going to do an overview of the culture. Oh, so we've been talking about the value of it. It's 25% of 80% of the core expenditure. Now, what that essentially means, yeah, oh, you're gonna, oh, it's interactive. There's a big, yeah. So basically, it's essentially worth about 20% of the core expenditure. Core expenditure is basically money spent on activity directly related to developing the game. So it's minus things like conceptual development, marketing. I can see HMRC smiling at me. Like it says there, you can actually sort of get loans against the value of the tax relief now, which you did not do, as we discussed earlier.
No, we did not.
You just kind of fed it straight back in.
Yeah, we fed it straight back in.
People ask a lot, like, how do people fail the cultural test? Like, does that happen a lot? One of the biggest things that people fail on, actually, is not setting up a video games development company before they start developing their game. That's one of the few ways where people actually fail if they are actually eligible. They've not set their company up. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That looks a little bit painful to you. There's a requirement that a minimum of 25% is spent in the UK or EA in order to be eligible. The video.
So I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So they're just in. Oh.
Oh my God. I'm fine.
Also, to the people there, can you actually see this? Like, no, my head's blocking like this, right? Should I move to the right? No, we're good.
Move to this
okay,
chair.
cool.
This is going really well.
No, it's fantastic. Oh no, see, we're kind of closer now.
So what I was gonna say before the
The incident.
The video. So what are you asking? You about
Also,
the
can we get a GIF of that, please? Thank you.
So one of the things that, in terms of like not
It's
passing.
gonna get millions of hits. It's gonna be the best. You wanted people to watch this. Now they're gonna watch it.
Well, if more people apply for video games tax relief, it's worth it. So yeah, a lot of people apply to us, but they've not actually set up a company before they started development. And that's one of the requirements, is that before full development begins, the VGDC has to be set up.
So it has to be a limited company.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, I mean, there are some circumstances where there's like circumstances where that's okay, but mostly it's not. And that's one of the biggest things people fall down on, is because they just don't realize. Yeah.
I wouldn't have even thought of that.
Yeah.
But that's an incredibly important part, not only for the video games tax relief portion, but the HMRC as well, who are in the crowd today, would probably set up your company. Set up your company.
The video game has to be intended for supply, by which we mean it has to be available for people to download, to buy in a physical copy. There are actually a museum installation in some circumstances might actually count. If there's a museum installation that's a video game, that might actually count because people are they don't probably can access it. But generally speaking, it's a game that people either buy or can download for free, is what we mean by intended for supply. So it can't just be like an internal sort of training course game or something like that.
So it can't be just an internal company thing. If
Exactly.
you're doing like work for hire for, I don't know, SAS or something like that.
So, I couldn't get it. I think we've recovered from the fall now. So this is what the actual cultural test is. It's a 31-point test. You only have to get 16 to pass. So you don't have to get all of them. Some people still do fill in
And
all.
you should stop at 16.
Absolutely. Stop at 16. When you reach 16, just stop. If you need actually any more points, we'll let you know and tell you which
Stop
ones
at
you're
16.
eligible for.
Like this is the thing that I absolutely screwed up the first time I did it. I was being so diligent. I was such a good boy. Like I filled out everything. And then the BFI is just like, you don't have to fill out everything. I was just like, no, but I mean I did it already, so it's fine. The problem is that if you fill out everything, that means you need to support everything with paperwork. And there's even a section, if you fill it out, you have to do an audit, right?
Yeah, so you haven't actually had to go through that, I don't think. So I'll briefly explain that. So in terms of the sections, there's the cultural content, what's actually in the game. It's possible to pass just in that section. So if you had a game that's all set in the UK with all British or European characters, the subject matter is there for British or European. If it's all English language or any of the other British languages, then you can pass there. There's also something called undetermined location and characters, which we'll kind of talk about a little bit later.
Yep.
But you can potentially, you can get points for that as well in content. There's section B, which is cultural contribution. So that's points for British creativity, British heritage, and diversity. There's cultural hubs and cultural practitioners. So cultural hubs is where work is being done. If a certain percentage of that is done in the UK on certain types of spend, then you can get points there. And cultural practitioners is basically who's doing the work in a number of different roles. For small studios, if the same person is doing multiple roles, they can get multiple points. That's the thing Alexander mentioned, where if you need points there to pass, so let's say the undetermined location that I mentioned, that would be something that's set in sort of a science fiction or fantasy location. If you had a game that was, say, completely set in Australia, then you couldn't get all the points in just Section A, or even with Section B, you couldn't get all the points. But you could still absolutely get points in C and D for where the work is being done and who's doing it. But you do actually need to get someone, an auditor, to verify that with something called an accounts report. If the work's being done here by British European people, it's easy to get those points, but you do have to pay for the accounts report. So we do, in all cases, basically say, if you can get the points in A or in A and B, do that, because then you don't have to spend some of your tax relief money, basically, on getting the
A and B. Do everything possible for A and B.
Mm-hmm. You apply online on our beautiful website. Beautiful. It takes about 4 to 6 weeks for us to do our assessment, generally speaking. So if you've got like a very strict deadline, make sure you basically put your application in about a month in advance. We require some supporting documents. There's an interim and a final certificate. Interim is where you apply whilst the game is still in development. Final is once the game is complete. For games as a service, there's potential that you can apply for either, but that's something specific that we would kind of let you know about and advise you on. For an interim application, you supply a budget, a schedule, a game design document of some kind, potentially a script.
Now, you had mentioned before, you've beyond the company stuff, that you've had issues with the budgets.
Yeah, we still get some companies that apply to us saying we don't have a budget or a schedule. I mean, every studio's like working practices are kind of different, of course, but if you don't actually have formalized documents, we do actually have templates that you can use that just kind of gives us the information we need to kind of assess your application. And I guess it might also be useful to actually see it laid out like that if that's not your way you work normally. But
no, the idea of the idea of generally not having a budget freaks me out. But yes, the BFI absolutely can supply you with one. And then again, GameDevBizBook.com. We have digital supplements on there. One of the things is a whole bunch of budgets, so you're able to look at what a full game development budget looks like, and then fill it in as well. But the BFI one is very it's detailed, like line item stuff, and just go through that, at least put the numbers in, and then on the other side of that, hey, you know how much your game is going to cost, which is a good thing to know going into game development.
Yeah, and something actually that scares people a bit still is for interim, so while they're applying while the game is still sort of in development, they'll put a figure as their total budget, and they're like, well, what if this changes by final?
I did that.
Which is, I mean, of course it's going to change.
No.
Like you can kind of predict the future a little bit with a budget, but not really. So obviously we're not going to tell you off if the budget is changed between interim and final. We're expecting that to happen. That's completely fine. We're just asked an estimated budget based on the information you have at the time.
And don't freak out about doing the interim certificate either. Like that one's just fill out the forms. Yes, the budget portion of it is probably the most stressful aspect of it, but it's done. Like, and then your accountant will thank you, and that just goes on. It's the final certificate, which definitely feels like taking your GC
SEs.
SEs. Yes. There we go. I'm
GCC.
localizing.
I was going to say something I've completely forgotten. That was.
Oh no, I'm sorry.
Oh, what was it? Oh, so the interim certificate, you can actually use that to claim whilst the game is still in development. So a lot of people use that to sort of cash flow as they're going along. Like, you develop a bit, then you can make a claim on that spend that you've done already, which is good to know.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, goodness. Right. So what? I don't know how much time we have. Okay, probably about.
How much time do we have? How much time? 10 minutes?
10, cool.
Okay.
That's fine.
Okay.
So we're kind of going to go through the specifics of... I almost felt the chair was going to go again.
Fell again.
So in terms of the cultural test, we're going to go through some of the interesting aspects of sort of your games that are actually kind of... and how that would correspond to that. So in terms of the setting, volume is fictionalized UK. So some people think that when we say UK, it very definitely has to be obviously contemporary, completely, literally UK. But if there is kind of like a futuristic or fictionalized element, that still gets the same points as something that's very obviously real world UK. Subsurface circular is
in an unknown location.
Exactly, undetermined, which is, like I mentioned before, it's kind of something that has, it's often either a fantasy or sci-fi kind of setting. It can be something completely generic, not in a bad way, generic, because some people get a little bit kind of like, generic. It's as if, it's like if there's an ocean or like a forest or something that has no kind of signifiers at all, no one talks about where it is, then that would also get undetermined. So, yeah.
So, volume takes place in Nottingham in a warehouse. Subsurface is on a train in an undetermined location. Then quarantine is on a boat in off the coast of, oh my God, why am I blanking right now? Croatia. No, it's Croatia. I was going to say King's Landing because that's what it is in my head now. But yeah, it's off the coast of Croatia. And yeah, the location aspect of things, you can have it set in a completely different place and it's fine. Yeah,
and one of the only things that people say to us sometimes, this is set in Wales, right? But there's nothing that says that it's set there. And they say, well, in the sort of in the background in our heads, it's set in Wales. But if we don't actually see it on screen, if that's not actually obvious, if no one discusses it, if none of the characters, if there's no kind of signifiers, we can't award the points for that being Wales because a player would not experience it being Wales.
Right.
So we do actually need to see it in kind of the on-screen content.
Yeah, Earthshape took place on a bunch of different planets. So, like, I wasn't sure if, like, that was an undetermined location or how that
space,
would play out.
I believe because space is not officially belonging to any country, we basically always count that as undetermined. I mean, if that changes, with Space Force or etc., whatever it's called. Characters, so circular, they're all robots.
Yep.
So no obvious nationalities.
Yep. No, subsurface, they're all robots, so no obvious nationalities. Volume, everyone has a British accent.
Yep.
Is clearly takes place in the UK. Quarantine is an international cast.
Yes.
And that one is actually interesting because we got a couple different points there because of how the cast is constructed.
Yeah.
Because of women in STEM roles.
Yeah, so in terms of like the nationalities, there's a bunch of different nationalities there. We kind of look at that as an ensemble cast, so there was some points there for some of them being EEA. It also got some points in B, which is the one I talked about in terms of cultural contribution, so that's British creativity, British heritage and diversity. That specifically got points in diversity for basically the two key like scientific voices, I guess, in the game. I didn't do that one, but basically they're both women, and specifically in STEM roles. So for the diversity thing, for on-screen characters, it's where there are characters, in this example, women that are kind of in roles that are not typically portrayed as in games, basically. And there's still a lack of women in kind of those roles in games, so they get points.
Yeah. No way, that was a surprise to us. Like when we got those, it's just like, oh no, you can't have it for this, but there's these, and that's what I'm saying. Like the BFI will work with you to make all of this like work itself out.
In terms of, I guess something we didn't really discuss much on the previous slide, but if you've got a game that's set, say, in an undetermined location, A3 in section A is for subject matter or underlying material. So if your game is set in an undetermined location or otherwise outside the UK or Europe, but the person that came up with the concept is British European, you can get points there, basically, for the underlying material. So that can be the concept, the script, the game design, for them being British European. So yeah, that can be if either they've adapted something or it's an original idea, they can potentially get points.
And your lawyer will have to sign a certificate. stating that the person who wrote
Yep.
it wrote it.
So basically, in some cases, someone might have like a kind of, in some cases, they might kind of have a writer's contract saying this person wrote the script for this, but in a lot of cases, there isn't that. We have a template for something called the underlying material declaration, which is where you can basically say, yes, I created this and I am British, and then the solicitor says, yes, they said this. We've kind of already mentioned B a little bit in terms of diversity, but you've kind of got points in every single section in B, which is quite a triumph, not for the same game, but I guess for British creativity, there was the idea of kind of the shorts was kind of like in terms of like a way of sort of distributing games, in terms of the idea, it's kind of similar to short films, but not really, like the idea that there's kind of it is basically a different kind of type of game. Like
It's an anthology series in game form.
Yeah.
Which is why some folks have compared it to the sort of Telltale series, but like Telltale to me is a television show that takes place over a full season. No, this is definitely like anthology shorts that go into that.
And although it didn't actually need it, Volume could have got British Heritage because Robin Hood. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's a twist on the Robin Hood myth, legend.
Is there a difference?
No, I don't know.
And I guess back onto more. That was quite interesting. But I always like actually discussing that in a of a nerdy way. In terms of actually, when I saw this still, I was like, are they hugging or is it more threatening? I'm not actually 100% sure.
That's up to you. That's up to your interpretation.
Yeah, it's interpretation like a Rorschach test. In terms of actually filling in forms and stuff, how long would you say that took you for each project?
I mean, if you can spread it out over a couple days, like over coffee or afternoon tea, it's very much a just slowly get it done. A couple hours, a few hours, like that's the thing is to me the filling out the form portion of it. Actually, the most difficult part is the underlying is making sure you set up time with your attorney and then go there and get them to sign and stamp and do the underlying materials. But the actual form filling out is a few hours.
Did you kind of have to change anything about the way you worked in order to kind of get all the information you needed, or to get everything, or in terms of like the timeline of doing stuff? Did that change at all, or?
I would say it is certainly difficult to do it before the game is solidified. Actually, that's a very true point. If you're going for the interim certificate, you absolutely want to make sure that the creative team has solidified what the game is about, who is in it, so that you are filling out all of the sections accurately. Because at the end, they're like, hey, are you lying? And if the creative team makes a change that you're not aware of, yes, you are. You're lying. It's fine.
In terms of the HMRC part of things, is that something that your accountant does in terms of Yeah.
So in this entire process, the BFI portion, easy. Talking to the creative team, easy. Filling out the forms, doing all that stuff, very easy. It's the HMRC portion. I would strongly recommend your accountant handle that. It is detailed work. I just saw the latest one because tax relief has been around now 3 years, 4 years, four. It's been around 4 years, and in that time. HMRC has also gotten a lot clearer on what they're looking for in terms of how these forms should be delivered to them. So yeah, your accountant should be the one handling that for sure.
Do you know how long it took in terms of actually applying to HMRC and you getting the money back? Do you know roughly how long it took every time?
I don't.
No.
I genuinely, I would say it's a couple months. It's definitely. I think we're going through it right now, and it should be in the accounts in a few weeks.
I'm not sure quite how. Is there any reason why a games studio in the UK that can qualify shouldn't apply, or should just everyone do it right now?
Everyone should do it. No, it's ridiculous. Like it is absolutely bizarre to me. Speaking to independent developers who don't want to go through this because it's too much of a hassle. It's not. The BFI, like the BFI portion of it is like, you know, like we said, it's a few hours, you send it in, the BFI will very likely, like, you know, come back to you that you know, need to fill out this specific thing better. But after that, it's your accountant's, you know, job to handle the rest of it. So you're already paying them, so why not have them handle it? It's part of doing your annual reports. Like, it's just part of the it's just doing business. That's it?
Yeah, it's nice. And do we have time for any questions?
They're debating.
Does anyone have a question, seeing as someone is coming out with a microphone? Oh,
hey.
Yes.
I was wondering whether you had any visibility on how this process might change if Brexit were to go through and Britain were to leave the European Union.
We don't.
Yes. How is that going to work?
We actually don't have any information on that at this time.
Because nobody has any information at this time.
As far as we're aware, nothing's going to change. Sorry, I can't give you any more information. Yeah.
Well, no, I mean, I'm actually curious to see what does happen, because, you know, hopefully the government doubles down. That would be nice, but I mean, no one has any clue what's happening at this moment.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah. Does anyone have any other questions?
I love it. The only question was a Brexit question.
Yeah. Well, that's basic. I mean,
that's life right now.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I'd say we probably, I mean, since the Brexit vote happened, obviously we've been doing sessions like this, and that is obviously always one of the questions. And yeah, as far as yeah.
Get her a mic.
I just want to give you some.
Oh no, that doesn't work.
It is now? Okay. Hi. I just want to give. I'm the policy lead at HMRC for the Creative Industry Tax Reliefs, which includes video games tax relief. So I can give you the assurance that the reliefs, as they currently stand, are continuing because they're written into domestic legislation. We will also be continuing with state aid, which means my lovely colleagues at the BFI will continue to do the cultural tests. But that's all I can say at this particular point. So I wouldn't get too hung up about the reliefs will be taken away on Brexit, because they are in domestic legislation, not EU legislation.
And how long is that locked in for at this time?
It's gone again. It really depends. What do you mean by locked in?
I mean, essentially, how long is VGTR locked? If it's a local law.
There's no sunset clause, which means that the domestic legislation comes to an end. Early today, somebody stood up and said that the relief would be in place until 2023. That's not entirely true. When we get approval for state aid, we get approval normally on a rolling 4-year, 5-year period. We have to reapply to the European Union every time. We've recently gone to the European Commission and they've given us approval for state aid. That is till 2023 or until the UK leaves the European Union. But on leaving the European Union, state aid is going to be taken over by another body, which will probably be the Competition and Market Authority, who will then administer state aid, as it currently is. But I can't actually say what will be going forward following all the negotiations and discussions. Obviously, we've got this relief in domestic legislation, but in terms of trade agreements and all these other politics which are going around, your guess is as good as mine what will happen, 5 years or whatever into the future.
So get your certificates in now, folks.
Are there any other questions before we go? You can, if you have very specific questions, you can come find us at some point afterwards, although I think you're doing something else after this, aren't you? Or not?
Apparently, I'm staying right here.
Oh, well.
Right in this comfy chair.
Try not to fall off like that. It's like you've been fine. But yeah, if you have any specific questions for me, I will be around. So, you will be upstairs. Will we? Okay. Okay.
Thanks for attending, everyone.
Thank you.